The ancients, Pythagoras and Kepler in particular, when they talked about the music of the spheres, they weren't talking about some external concept. It's not our ears. It's every cell in our body has these micro antennae that are getting signals from these rhythms, our physical meat bodies. These are the shadows that are being cast from multi-dimensions into this world. But as it moved through Flatland, it would become a circle. And the Flatlanders couldn't possibly understand this from another dimension because they don't have any other dimensions. I sometimes think that we're like radios and scientists are like idiots breaking open a radio looking for Mozart inside. The most obvious cycle is roughly half the people on the planet bleed on a lunar cycle. Duh. The moon is not just a thing that we can see. It's a crescent of a new moon or a full moon. When we're not looking at the particle, it's a wave. It's 13 waves a year. It's an ongoing form of a cycle. Like Saturn is this lump of rock with rings around it, but it also continues to move in a 29-year cycle, roughly three cycles every century. And so we have this hum. The ancients, Pythagoras and Kepler in particular, when they talked about the music of the spheres, they weren't talking about some external concept. The spheres of the planets actually hum. They just hum so deep and so low notes that we can't hear it with our ears. Instead, we dance to it without even knowing that there's music.
So your ears hear this melody.
It's not our ears. It's not our ears. It's every cell in our body has these micro antennae that are getting signals from these rhythms, these complex waveforms, and we don't even know what's happening. It's way too low to hear with our ears. You know, there's a saying, I don't know where it comes from, that dance as if no one's watching. Well, in a way, we're all dancers to music that no one else can hear. So when someone seems like they're crazy, they're just dancing to their own music.
Beautifully put. So then the stars and the planets, when you know the storyboard of each star and planet, it becomes a mirror reflection of our daily life.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So we are heavenly beings.
We are heavenly beings that are multidimensional and not linear in time, but we're casting shadows into the three-dimensional world. And what we see as events and patterns of events, what we see is our physical meat bodies. These are the shadows that are being cast from multi-dimensions into this world, so that ultimately what we're seeing, there's a wonderful book from the, I think, 1950s by a mathematician called Flatland. And the book is about this imaginary world that exists on a plane. And these beings that exist on this flat piece of paper come into contact with things they don't understand, but they're three-dimensional objects. If a sphere came into Flatland, if it touched Flatland, it would be a point. But as it moved through Flatland, it would become a circle. And the Flatlanders couldn't possibly understand this from another dimension because they don't have any other dimensions. In a way, we're all Flatlanders in three dimensions, so we can't understand what comes in from other dimensions. And we look at our bodies and say, this is all that exists, but they're just shadows being cast in three dimensions from a higher order of being.
You mentioned the moon. And since the moon is the closest planet to us that orbits around us,
yes,
affects us in many ways. You said there are cycles with each planet.
Yeah.
So there are cycles with the moon that goes around the earth. Tell us about it.
Well, the most obvious cycle is roughly half the people on the planet bleed on a lunar cycle. Duh. I don't believe in astrology. Oh, you don't believe in the menstrual cycle? Okay, I get it. I mean, it's scientists are so dumb in their belief of things that, Lavoisier was a chemist in the early 18th century. And at that time, one of the big mysteries was, how do meteors fall from the sky? And it was a big scientific discussion. And Lavoisier, who was the director or president of the French Academy of Scientists, basically made the statement that rocks can't fall from the sky because there are no rocks in the sky to fall. This is the way scientists think. In other words, there's this closed logic. Of course things fall from the sky, but if we believe as a scientist that the moon can't affect things on Earth, well then the menstrual cycle of roughly a lunar cycle has nothing to do with the moon. But it was until Newton came along, the tides had nothing to do with the moon either. What was the mechanism? We need, if we're a material culture, we need these actual mechanisms to justify the correlations. And so, the moon is incredibly important. It's a cycle of feeling. It's a cycle of full moon, new moon, high tide, low tide, of at full moons, aside from the fact that there may be more arrests or crazier nights in the emergency rooms of hospitals at full moon, the idea of the werewolf, of we become more animalistic in our nature at the full moons, all these things might have some truth to it. But what's most interesting to me is that there have been scientific experiments done again and again and again that shows that surface tension varies with the lunar cycle. Now, what do I mean by that? Surface tension is how a solid object keeps water away from itself. In other words, you can take a pin and float it, even though it's heavier than water. You can float it on water because surface tension keeps the water bundled up around it in certain places. And once you push it and it breaks the surface, then it sinks to the bottom. So there's an experiment or a lab test that's done on blood that determines how long it takes for blood, when mixed with certain chemicals, to separate out into two different they're colloidal suspensions, into two separate solutions. The amount of time it takes for that to happen is different at the new moon and the full moon. That's all we need to know as astrologer, that the cycles of what goes on up there actually has real chemical, mechanical impact. We don't necessarily know the mechanism, but then again, we don't know the mechanism of what causes birth. We don't know the mechanism of what causes life. I sometimes think that we're like radios, and scientists are like idiots breaking open a radio looking for Mozart inside.
But they also contribute to bringing us every little component that is necessary to put together to make the whole out of it, so we can see the whole picture. It's like the pixels of the TV
It's the
screen.
particle of the particle wave duality. Agreed. Yeah.
And maybe that's why they get stubborn and they get so stuck in their own way and they cannot see the big picture.
I agree.
They're in the pixel.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not down on science, but it's not science, it's technology. I love my cell phone, my laptop, I love my iPad. I love what modern science has brought us. It's just that the view that reality is the only reality is dangerous.
It is dangerous. That's why we want you to be on the same mission as we are, connecting everything in our world into making sense of our own personal lives and living the best that we have ever lived. And it's a possibility for every individual on the face of the earth. And thank you for all your contributions to make our daily lives more manageable.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I would like to end with one thought, and that is, think cosmically, act locally.
Wow! We are in it. Thank you.
Thank you.